Okay, we have come to the end of the day of questioning of Joe Batty, a anti-fascist activist who was targeted by the undercover police officer Carlo Soracci. I am joined by Zoe Young, regular of this parish, from the campaign opposing police surveillance. There were a lot of more questions for Joe after lunch, but there were a few. As is the case for all witnesses, civilian witnesses, he was questioned about. He was asked, about the personal impact, the way in which we were shown reports that, literally the titles of reports were Joe Batty lost his job. Joe Batty is having marital problems. Deeply, deeply personal reporting that really had literally nothing to do with political activity.
Yeah, no, it was just embarrassing, really. That this is what our taxes are paying for. Just to be really intrusive and stirring. It just felt like shit stirring, a lot of the reports. I was at a lot of the protests that were talked about today. And so it kind of really brings it home when you were there and you know that you were being influenced by that your experience of your political engagement, your experience of democracy and everything was being influenced by basically like shit stirring. I was really struck towards the end that Knitting sort of personally addressed Joe Batty saying, so I understand that through your work you've had to interact with the police and asking him like how his being mentioned in these reports might have affected his job. And it's like, well, one, how would he know? Because we haven't had all the disclosure that we should have had for a start. But two, it felt like he really was treating him more like his equal at a certain level, in a different way to the way he's treated quite a lot of other witnesses who haven't necessarily been white men with some sort of professional status.
I think the fact that Joe Batty is a freeman of the City of London, that he has had a career that is at the very top of his profession, it makes him a man of substance. And we know that members of the establishment, such as sirs and high court judges, view people very differently. They understand they have an understanding of hierarchy, which means that someone such as myself, or anybody who's been a witness at the inquiry, are not don't carry as much weight as a man who is a freeman of the City of London, who has had that kind of career, who has had professional dealings with the police over many, many, many years. And it's simply, as is the case for everybody in this country, is treated differently based on how he's perceived by the aristocracy.
Yeah, it was just really blatant. I didn't even know that about him being a freeman or whatever. I was just like, oh, he's clearly perceived as somebody valid, almost, in Mitting's world. Mitting refused to have a diversity panel who might have helped him to understand issues of class, race, gender, etc. that are so central to this whole story. But something else that really struck me was they were discussing what happened when Occupy London Stock Exchange happened. When was it? It was about 2011 or something.
Yeah. This was when at the end, Sir John Mitting asked Joe Batty to explain his professional history and the interactions with the police. And basically, he just gave his CV. It felt like.
Yeah, and I was quite involved in that. I was there. And
at the Occupy camp, which was literally just outside.
Literally outside. Outside this building are a series of big sculptures on columns, which are made by my sister, Emily Young. And I actually had my sister come down and address the Occupy movement at that time. And so I'm very aware of all this. But also what he was speaking about today was that he'd been liaising as someone working in homelessness to make sure that all the people who'd been attracted, as he put it, to the camp, people with maybe mental health, substance abuse issues or whatever, had somewhere to go. Now, what was missed out in that is the fact, which was very widely known and evidenced at that time, was that the police were encouraging people with substance abuse issues and mental health problems who, for whatever reason, were not able to get into proper homeless shelters. They were encouraging them to come to the camps. And that was a major reason why the Occupy movement, as it was just outside here and in Finsbury Square, why it kind of fell apart, because you had a lot of well-meaning political people holding an occupation and trying to shore up all the gaps that austerity had created in the social support services for people with substance abuse and mental health crises. And they were besieged. They were literally besieged by all sorts of people with all sorts of problems. And they had no training, no safeguarding protections. A lot of young people with their own vulnerabilities were just engaged in politics as they thought. And they ended up trying to kind of do social services. And it's not the only time that that's happened. It's happened repeatedly when there's been a temporary autonomous zone or an occupied space, that there's been a push by seemingly usually the police to encourage people who are not able to find refuge anywhere else to go and find refuge with the well-meaning lefties and anarchists. And I just wanted to add that really, because I was right in the middle of a lot of that happening, and it was spoken about and known about a lot at the time. And I think it's kind of relevant. You know, he wasn't just working with the police about making sure people were not abandoned when all the political people left. He didn't presumably know that, but maybe that's because of his position in the hierarchies or something, or maybe it was only obvious to those of us who are more on the kind of on the ground level or something. I mean, it was the reason why all these camps generally try to have a rule of no drugs or alcohol on the camp, because if you have that rule, then anyone who's got a substance abuse issue won't want to be there. And the same reasons that they can't get into the homeless shelters are the same reasons that they cannot, you know, it's not their fault. It's with the best will in the world that they could or should be welcomed in. But if they're going to bring their drugs and alcohol, then it ends up undermining the movement, and the police know that. And anyway, it's something that really came home to me. A lot of things have really come home to me today because, you know, he was talking about whether he'd been encouraged to stay in Italy longer and go to the Genoa protests against the G8.
Yeah, that was there was a report that mentions going to Louvain, a school in Belgium, and then going on to the G8 protests in Geneva. He said, he did go to the school in Belgium, but didn't go on to Geneva. Maybe others did. This was again an example of a way in which there's the exaggeration by the undercover officer in his reports about the activities of those he was spying on, making them out to be much more active than they necessarily were.
Yeah, I mean, and being in Geneva is not something that you would forget. I mean, that was massive. You know, one of the protesters was shot dead, and a lot of people ended up in. Well, they were attacked by fascists in the Indie Media building. The building, there was a school, the Diaz school, and I won't go into too much to that, but it was a big deal, and it was basically fascism in operation through some of the Italian authorities. A lot of people were caught on the border and put into really, really unpleasant imprisonment, where there was a lot of sexual abuse, etc. The Genoa was a big deal, and you would remember if you were there. You know?
Yeah, no, I mean, Joe Batty was very clear that he wasn't there. We saw a great deal of reports by Carlo Soracchi about. Sorry, I do apologise. We saw a lot of reports by Carlo Soracchi about Joe Batty, and not just, as I mentioned earlier, the personal ones about his marriage, about his employment, but also ones about his supposed engagement in anti-fascism. These largely centered around the idea that he was involved in attacking not just protests, but also supposedly visitations of anti-fascism into the living rooms of fascists, which Joe very, very robustly countered throughout the day, as this was brought up repeatedly again and again through the very repeated questioning which the Deputy Counsel of the Inquiry, Tim Salisbury, employed. As is the nature of the inquiry, we have a very repetitive approach to the way in which questions are asked. And a lot of just like centering on the idea that he was somehow violent. Well, what did you make of that?
I thought he spoke really well on that front. I think making plain that anti-fascism is about protecting communities from violence. That is the core of it. You know, fascists are randomly violent people they perceive as lesser than them.
I wouldn't say it's particularly random, but
well, no, okay, yeah, it's not particularly random. They're targetedly violent, fair.
Systemically violent.
Systemically, yes. And anti-fascism is specifically about protecting communities from that. And he was like this idea that they should go out and be doing like firebombing something or creating a ruck in a housing estate in a community that's being targeted by the fascists. It's like it's the opposite of what the anti-fascists were trying to do, which is to prevent violence in places where people are living and prevent things being set on fire, because that's not good in general. It's like it's an idea of just maintaining civic peaceful space for people to go about their lives and loves and work and whatever they're doing, and without being battered, without being burned out. That's literally the focus, and I think he made that really clear, and that was really valuable input that he made, I think, today.
Yeah, I mean, one of the reports specifically was about the fact that Joe had applied for a job on the Independent Police Complaints Commission, a job that he was eminently qualified for due to his professional background. And there was a very direct, very clear report from Carlos Araki about how that this application for a job by Joe Batty and others who had no criminal record, have no history of any form of criminality or trouble with the police, should be viewed as an attack on the police. And as it turned out, Joe had never heard anything back. He had intended to apply to become a magistrate, apparently, something which he didn't pursue because he was aware that there was a level of vetting that was taking place about any applications he would make in that direction. It was quite interesting, actually. He talked about how over the last 8 years, before he retired, he worked in Kensington and Chelsea, specifically as a community development officer in North Kensington, obviously the site of the Grenfell Tower, it was of the Grenfell fire, and that he had a responsibility to engage with the community groups in that area. And he said he found that particularly difficult because he was well aware that the supposed partnerships that were taking place between those groups and the police were in fact an opportunity for the police to snoop, to spy on the people, and probably to disrupt their personal lives. And I mean, he did say that he didn't actually, he wasn't able to articulate that to them because of the nature of his role. And just really, I mean, I think it was quite interesting, actually. The effect on Mitting himself at the end of the day was unusual. When we talked already about how he views Joe Batty as a man of substance, someone who he takes seriously and seems to consider have more weight than than any of the other witnesses we've seen so far at the inquiry. And he kind of spoke to that about how that his relationship with the police in professional setting had been coloured. As you say, Joe Batty said himself, he has no way of knowing, he can't know if the registry file being opened on him by Carlos Sarachi's reporting on him, Saraki, I do apologise, Saraki, that would result, it would have any impact on his ability to do his job. But I mean, it's very telling that when we talk about blacklisting, because of the amazing work done by the Blacklist Support Group, particularly in reference to the construction industry, we think of it in terms of a very formal process where people are put on lists. But in reality, this level of blacklisting happens in a very informal sense as well, and it's almost certain that that's actually happened to Joe Batty in these cases.
Yeah, I mean, why would it not have really? But they're asking him that when they were today saying, oh, well, you won't have seen this document we've just released, and asking him questions about a document. It's like, well, release all the files, give people all their disclosure in really good time before they're asked questions in hearing, so that people can answer your questions in an intelligent, informed manner. I mean, it was just again and again and again, from the beginning of this inquiry, what the core participants, that's us who randomly got included into this thing at the beginning, we've just been saying, just release the files, give us our files so that we can see what they were saying about us. And then we can work out what was going on, and we can actually do a large part of the job that this inquiry is supposed to be doing, just because we are interested and annoyed, and we have all this background knowledge and networks, and we're there and can say, well, no, they lied about that. That's very straightforward. Because repeatedly, like you used this word that was spoken about today about things being an attack. So this presentation of just people going about their day or doing what they do is seen as an attack. It's very much akin to this idea that people in having a protest, and if they are then pushed around or attacked by the police, might defend themselves and get defined as violent. And that goes again and again into the reports. And then a movement or an individual is defined as a violent person, or they do attacks, and it's not violent, it's not attacks, it's just trying to go about your day, it's trying to do what needs to be done for democracy, for accountability, for actually stopping yourself getting knocked down by a big guy with a truncheon or whatever it might manifest as at that time. But it's a question of discourse that the more time I spend in this inquiry listening in, you hear it again and again, this sort of assumption that people going about their day as somebody on the streets on a protest, somebody black, somebody gay, somebody working class, somebody who really feels strongly that spirit that supposedly everyone had coming out of the Second World War of, never again, no passaran, we don't accept fascists on our streets. That just by existing and going about their day, and living their values is somehow an attack. And that's really problematic. And I think we need to really watch out for it because it comes through so often in the questioning and the assumptions that sort of underlie what the judge overseeing it sort of seems to be taking from it. Sometimes, not always. Sometimes he comes away with good insights, but too often he just is lacking that diversity panel that would help him understand the lives that are different from his.
Yeah, there's a couple of things I'd like to pick up on. One of them was we were taken through the counter protest to a National Front demonstration outside the Cock Tavern, where some members of the Irish community were attempting to have a meeting that was opposed by the National Front, and there was a number of arrests of the counter demonstrators at that particular event. Their details were taken, and then there was no further action. However, those specific details, which we were led to believe in certain cases were quite unique. There's no suggestion that they were untrue to the police, but certainly there were unique details that would be given to the police, ended up in the next issue of The Flag, which was the National Front's fascist newspaper. This isn't the first time. We heard something very similar happen to Mark Metcalf with Combat 18 publishing his personal details, which have only come from the police. And it's not something that the inquiry is looking at, but there appears to be a level of collusion that existed, maybe still does exist, between the Metropolitan Police and far-right activists. And I think this is like another layer of... We talk a lot about the way in which the SDS, the spy cops in general, targeted the far left. They targeted anti-fascists whilst leaving the far right alone, allowing them to blossom into the way in which we now see it today. But there appears there's another layer of that in fact, that there was an encouragement and a feeding of information to the far right by the police, particularly those... It seems like the targeted individuals were targeted by the spy cops. It wasn't just a matter of the SDS targeting these individuals. The police in general had it in for them, and they were using any means at their disposal for them to get attacked by the far right in other settings. Is there anything you want to say about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, just remembering just a couple of months ago when they were talking about the Welling protests and one of the spy cop bosses was sort of like, we won, when far right sort of perceived to have the anti-fascists on the run and things. And yeah, that was very much the case. I mean, from the beginning, when we've queried why is it that only maybe one or two of the thousands of groups targeted were at all really on the right, of the far right. And we're always told, oh, well, the police have their other means of gaining that knowledge. Well, what is that other means? I mean, we were aware that in the 70s, like the National Front, the British National Party had chapels or whatever they called their little units inside police stations in London. We know what just happened with Charing Cross police, having a load of guys being sacked for being really crudely racist and sexist. And it's not that opaque what's been going on, but it would be nice if it was named in this inquiry, maybe.
I mean, it's very clear that the police viewed anti-fascism as a form of criminality, a specific form of criminality of preventing fascists from being able to do what they do, which, let's be very clear, is bring violence to marginalized communities. And that they were willing to facilitate that, not just by preventing anti-fascism, but going further, which is incredibly chilling.
One more thing, I mean, mention of the Cock Tavern reminded me that the Reclaim the Streets meetings were there for quite a while, in the sort of maybe late 90s, early noughties. I went to quite a few meetings in the Cock Tavern anyway. And over the next few days, we're going to be hearing a lot more about the undercover police in the Reclaim the Streets movement, which I don't know many people who never went to a Reclaim the Streets party. Maybe it's just the people I know, but maybe among the listeners as well. taking over a street, creating a temporary autonomous zone, playing music, having sandpits, games, sofas, fun. And for a long time, it was presented in the press as what it was, basically a street party, a bit of a carnival. The goal is to have fewer cars, less air pollution, less sort of separation of everybody into their own little space, and more collectivity, more space for children to play, more, we'd have a lot of, getting an old car and growing plants out of it. It was all about let's grow things instead of pollute things. But that movement over time was gradually more and more and more brutalized, and we're going to learn a lot about the process through which these undercover police got involved in RTS, which was probably great fun because we've heard how much party guys some of them were. I'm sure they loved going along and being part of a free party movement.
Yeah, so tomorrow, normally the way the inquiry works is you have a witness, a series of witnesses about a particular undercover police deployment, then we hear from the undercover police officer. For whatever reason, Joe Batty's evidence is slightly out of order, as it normally works. For the rest of this week, we will be hearing from people who were affected by the deployment of Jim Boyling, the undercover officer who went by the name Jim Sutton. He deceived at least 2 women into long-term intimate relationships. One of them, Monica, will be being questioned tomorrow. Another of them, Rosa, a woman he deceived into a long-term relationship and had 2 children by, will be giving evidence on Thursday. On Wednesday, we will be hearing from Roger Geffin and GRD, who were both prominent activists within Reclaim the Streets and the Camp for Climate Action, amongst other things. We will be looking at quite a lot at Reclaim the Streets for the rest of the week. Well worth looking at for that. Is there anything you want to add about that?
Well, Jim Sutton himself will be on the week after.
Oh, I've just been informed that Rosa has cancelled giving evidence on Thursday, which is right. Okay, but we'll be doing it later at another time. So I'm not sure if there's another hearing that's going to take place on Thursday, or there'll be a gap in the hearings. I know yet.
It was suggested to me that Thursday and Friday would be no hearings as a result.
Okay, so there might be a procedural hearing on Thursday. We don't know yet. I'm just receiving this information now, so I'll try and do a proper update. As I've said before in the past, I've done I've done every night. I've done a Twitter Spaces, doing an audio update of the day. I'm not going to be doing those anymore. It was just too much work. But I'll be doing a video again tomorrow. I'll update you on that. Anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, just to say, we're hearing from the people targeted. Well, eventually by Jim Boyling this week, and then from himself next week, and then this is carrying on. There'll be a week off, but then the last week of February, and then throughout March, there is going to be hearings after hearings after hearings, and they are going to be. There's going to be a lot. This is going to be one of the most intense sessions, I think, in the inquiry to date. There's going to be some very current situations that are still ongoing, or that there's a lot of people around who are part of, are going to be talked about. And just spread the word. You can come down. You can come and actually sit in the public gallery. You just have to be prepared to be searched and bring ID. It hasn't filled up yet, has it? And
no, nowhere near.
Yeah, and you can watch it on YouTube. 10-minute delay. It stops sometimes if someone says a name or something by accident, but you can watch a lot of this, and the reports that Tom's doing, the weekly reports, etc., coming out of the campaign opposing police surveillance. Just spread it. Tell your mates, people who are involved, people who were there, people who weren't there but would have loved to have been. Just spread it. This is so important.
Well, thanks for joining us. We'll be back again tomorrow with Monica giving evidence. I really recommend tuning in for that if you're able to. As Zoe says, it is incredibly easy to attend in the public gallery. You don't need to have booked. There was a process of booking, but it's not necessary to do that. You can just come in, show some ID. They will search you. It's not invasive. Very straightforward. If you have any issues with getting in, let us know, and we can easily sort that out. It's not a problem at all. Anything you'd like to add?
Just, it's opposite St Paul's Cathedral in the International Dispute and Resolution Centre.
All the information is on the website.
But the website's a bit opaque, so.
Our website, the spycops.info.
The proper website, yeah.
Thanks for joining us. We'll see you all again tomorrow. Bye for now.